Hi, the intention of this session is to help you actually understand more about the way the Learning Challenge curriculum is intending to work. Many of you may well know the Learning Challenge curriculum from many years ago when I designed a curriculum that was intended really to be more inquiry-based, to really give children a real sense of history, geography and science particularly, that kind of alluded much more to the national curriculum than we perhaps may have done before. Since then, of course, we've had the 2014 national curriculum come in, followed, of course, by the 2019 revised framework from Ofsted, which indeed has actually even been added to by many of the different sort of subject issues that we've had coming through from Ofsted as well. So kind of without any more to do, I'd like to share with you exactly where we are taking the Learning Challenge currently. So I'm going to share the screen with you and hopefully take you through some of the major components within the way we're now actually working. Okay. So basically what we've got is a Learning Challenge curriculum. It's actually been deliberately designed to help pupils know more, to help them remember more, and specifically in the areas of science, history, and geography, although we do have aspects of all subjects that are delivered in the national curriculum available to you as well. The other thing is, because it's a webline or online resource, we're continually adding to it and actually sort of refining certain areas that we're actually working on as well. What it does do, basically, it provides you with a sequence of learning for the main three subjects that I've actually mentioned, although it does provide you with that across all subjects as well. There is a section for early years which links with the work that we've actually done with year 1 through to year 6. Basically, we have then actually created areas of learning which gives you enough choice, so you don't have to follow one system. There are choice mechanisms built in for you, and you can therefore actually make a decision about which are the right ones for your school. Or you could even develop your own based on an original that we've got here. So if, for instance, I've got one that actually focuses very much on Manchester, there's no reason why you don't look at that in the context of Nottingham, using some of the same material, but being more specific, obviously, to your locality. Basically, beyond that, what we've done then is literally provide a scheme of work for every single unit. Within the scheme of work, you'll find that we've talked distinctly about substantive knowledge and disciplinary knowledge. So effectively, what you can do is that you can actually really see that across a complete year, you can have your science, your history, and your geographies completely sorted for you. And basically, this will allow you to really get a very comprehensive coverage of the national curriculum. However, basically, we start with a main question. Now, we've gone down the questioning route because I like that idea of inquiry-based learning in the classroom. However, you could rename those and literally go outside the questioning if you so wished. For the sake of what I'm talking about today, I'm going to keep to the main questions. And basically what we've done is to make that question very simple, very straightforward, without actually causing any kind of, shall we say, ambiguity within the way we're working. So in the past, for instance, we might have used a question which might have alluded to something like, for instance, there's one I can think of for geography for year 1, which I used to have when we were looking at hot places in the world and cold places in the world. I decided to call it, why are meerkats? Why would meerkats not live in the North Pole? I thought that was going to be quite, exciting for children to look at, etc., etc. However, in reality, we often had that unit delivered with a huge focus on meerkats, but barely a kind of a look on hot countries and cold countries across the world. So what we're now trying to do is to make sure that the composite, the main learning, is actually straightforward, simple, and sort of does what it says on the tin, okay? And then the idea beyond that is we break that composite question into a number of components. We've tried to restrict them to 5 components at most for each of our units of learning, because that's what's recommended from people like the Education Endowment Foundation, that we don't actually give too many components. Otherwise, we may just skim the surface of things without getting into the depth that we would normally like to have. Okay, in the main, one of the components would normally be perhaps a lesson or a week's learning. But for instance, there are examples where one component might actually take quite a few lessons to take, and others might actually take far less than the lesson to actually complete. So what have we got? In a nutshell, some of the key principles behind here. We have a bespoke curriculum because you're in charge of it, you get on with it. We're actually recommending certain units. Some may well be delivered almost as we would wish, but we would actually expect you to actually make some input from your locality, knowing your children, etc., to make it bespoke to you. We're covering history, geography, science, art, and DT, and we're looking at early years, we're looking at foreign languages, we're actually looking at PSHE, PE as well, and we're really aiming at giving you a comprehensive curriculum. However, if you just want to stick with the science, history, geography, or the science, history, geography, art, and DT, you're able to do so. So what we're looking at is a learning sequence in the first instance for every subject, okay? And we try and create that so there is a story going through. So for instance, okay, we're looking at chronology in Key Stage 2, where year 3 would actually start with looking at the Stone Age period, leading on to going beyond 1066 in year 6, okay? So effectively, we are taking account of what we call the substantive knowledge that children are needing to acquire, and we're also hoping to develop their disciplinary knowledge alongside that. So we're aiming at our children to become historians, to become geographers, become artists, to become scientists, etc., etc. As mentioned earlier, in the main, we're aiming for an inquiry-based approach, okay? And we're actually having then composite question, which is then broken into a number of associated components that would help children to get there. We have a knowledge organizer really within each one, and every single unit of learning, we really focus heavily on the implementation side of the curriculum so that you've actually got some level of continuity. So we go through what we call the link it, the learn it, the check it, the show it, and the know it, making it stick. So the learn it effectively, we are talking about children's prior knowledge, and we're working very, very hard to ensure they have links to that learning. On the learn it side, we are making sure that we have the substantive knowledge, the discipline knowledge in place. We're also looking basically at the quality of the learning that's happening at that level, so that we are really making sure the composite is clear and the components that follow it really follow on quite nicely. We've put in some check-ins from time to time so that you are confident that your children are keeping up with where you're going, and they therefore are not falling behind at any stage. The show it bit is right at the end of the unit, when the children have an opportunity of putting a memory map together, which actually is on one page, which really summarizes the learning they've done within that unit of learning. And then beyond the learning, we bring in the know it side, which are a number of retrieval tasks, which we can use a term, 2 terms, or even a year after with children to help them keep on top of the learning that went on. So with all of that in mind, then, let's look at what it looks like in reality. I've decided to start off by looking at a long-term overview in a history unit. It happens to be a year 2 unit, which is how did the Victorians influence our life today? So the question, I hope you can see, is fairly straightforward, okay? It's the sort of question that we can see exactly what we're aiming to children to learn, and hopefully we will help them to do so. The 5 components on here have been deliberately set out. So some of them, for instance, would be more disciplinary than substantive. So the first one here How do we know what life was like for Victorians is very much a disciplinary piece of learning, where we're getting children to look at evidence bases, where we're getting them to look at what is it around that helps us build the picture of what life was like. On the other hand, the substantive side of it is the number two there, is what do we mean by the Industrial Revolution, okay? And therefore you can see exactly what we're trying to get at. The third bit here is what was life like for many children during the Victorian era? What games did children play during the Victorian era? And what was home life like for many people who lived in that Victorian era? So we're trying to build up a picture for children. Underneath, under the disciplinary knowledge side here, we recognize what we're aiming to do with children throughout this unit of learning, okay? Another example here is a year 4 example. This time is why was the ancient Egyptian civilization ahead of its time? And one of the things we really aim to do is to, because we are keen on making sure that everything joins together, we are really aiming for us not to have an ancient civilization unit in history that is separate to everything else that's going on. So our aim in this part really is to look at what was happening in Britain when the ancient Egyptians were at their most powerful. In other words, we're linking it to the work that's already ongoing in history. They've covered before. They would, for instance, say that much of the ancient Egyptian civilization's most powerful period coincided with the time when we were in what we call the Iron Age in the British Isles. And therefore, we can look at how different kind of lifestyles were like at that stage. The next one, of course, is very disciplinary, because we're asking children to think about the impact that archaeologists have had on helping us know what went on in ancient Egypt at that period of time. And indeed, we're also following the national curriculum in the third one by making sure that it's not just the ancient Egyptians they get to know about the Indus Valley, the ancient Sumer, and the Shang dynasty at the same time. Because if you go back to the national curriculum, you will find that it asks us to make sure that children have knowledge of all 4 civilizations from around 3,000 years ago, and then to begin to recognize where are they today in comparison to where they were in, well, obviously same geographical place, but where were they in terms of kind of being leaders in the world, if you like, in terms of the developments that were happening in their countries. Then basically on this one, we're asking children to think about the ancient Egyptian reliance on their gods, okay, and obviously on the impact they had on perhaps really introducing the world to some form of slavery at the very beginning of civilization. Again, the disciplinary knowledge we hope the children to acquire at year 4 is set out underneath. Let's go to geography. I put a geography example in here, which is a year 1 geography, where children are really needing to know about where they live in the UK and how do they actually are able to begin to make use of maps, shall we say, to help them identify that. So the first thing they're going to do is to use maps to locate 4 countries that make up the UK, their capital cities, and the main 3 seas that surrounds the UK. Now, we put a lot of emphasis on this because one of the criticisms that came out from the 2017 surveys that went around is that something like 50% of year 6 leavers in 2017 could not locate Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland on a map of the UK. We want children also in this bit to be able to actually write their address or find out exactly what their address is, and of course their postcodes. And then basically want them to start using a local map to find out about the streets that surround their school. They'll find out more about road signs, okay, and also about the nearest town or cities to them. In year 3, this happens to be a rivers one, which could easily be done in year 4 if that's what you wish. You can change it around slightly. But basically, we're looking at the main features of a river. What is a water cycle? Okay, we're getting them to look at the upper, middle, and the lower courses of a river. Okay, we get them to consider why so many cities are created close to a river. And then we want them to carry out a field study work by looking at rivers in their locality more generally. Now, these kind of, what I've just shown you effectively, are basically the long-term overview in the first place. Now, just to give you an example, we've about 30 or so of those in history and about 30 or so of those in geography. It's for you to choose your road through it, basically, your roadway, and to make a decision as to which units you're going to use. Now, some people are going for 2 units of history, 2 units of geography each year, because they recognize they get some real depth. There are others that are successful with doing 3 history and 3 geography, but others also have said to me that are trying to do 3 and 3 in history and geography. I think some of them are struggling to get the depth of learning in that they would really wish to have. So basically what you've got is a kind of a picture here where we're really looking at not just the design, the curriculum intent, but we're also driving the implementation by the introduction, as I said earlier, of the link it, the learn it, the check it, the show it, and the know it. And if we get that right, which is actually really very upfront in the units of learning, we will be a long way on enabling you to have a curriculum that really does actually work for you. Now, this is the outcome that we're actually looking at here. The link it, as I said before, is a massive part of understanding cognitive load theory, okay? What we do know is that if we are successful in igniting in children either a knowledge that they've had about the new learning you're going to do, that's some knowledge they can link to that they've met before, or indeed an experience they've had they can link it to, it makes it easier to remember things for the long term. And that is part of the ongoing process that we're looking at here. So for instance, what we're saying is the link it takes part before we introduce the new learning, and it's absolutely essential to do that. Otherwise, if we don't do that, I'm almost at the point of saying, well, so why do we bother with the rest? Because actually they're going to forget it much more quickly anyway. So it's kind of really saying that everything should start with a link it. Now, in some units, it may take a full lesson. In other units, half a lesson, half an hour, whatever. But we need to do it, okay? The learn it and the check it are happening, obviously, during the introduction of new learning. So we're focusing on the composite, the components, etc. within the learn it, the substantive knowledge and the disciplinary knowledge come into that bit as well as actually building in checkpoints to make sure the children are keeping up with what we're doing. The show it effectively is the last part of the learning, okay? In other words, when they've actually finished the unit of work, they have kind of a page, be it A4, A3 in some cases, where children can actually just bring together a summary of all the learning they've done. You can further help that by actually putting subheadings on that page for them, which are effectively the components you've gone through. So if I'm actually doing the Romans and there are 5 components, one of them might be, so why did the Romans come here in the first place? That might be a subheading on one of the bubbles on the memory map they're trying to create. Another one might be, so why did the Romans leave? That might be another subheading you put on there already. The idea behind this basically is that these are pages which could be actually added to the last unit memory map they've done. So the idea is as children leave and move through your school, their memory map book would actually contain a 1-page example of all the learning they've done in history, all the learning they've done in geography, all the learning they've done in science. Those books go with them through the school. Lots of children who are doing this love this activity, and many of them actually take their activity home with them to really add some detail onto them, okay? And the idea thereafter is that you as a class teacher allow opportunities for children to have a 10-minute period from time to time when they actually discuss their memory map, not necessarily the last one they've done, it may be the one they've done before, with their partner and so forth. Then after the learning, after the show it, after they've done all of that, we are looking then at what I call the know it sections, okay? And the know it section effectively is something that happens a term or 2 terms afterwards, where we've built into each of the units of learning an activity which they could well be doing at a later stage. Incidentally, we've got check-it activities within the unit of learning as well. So we're not asking teachers to invent them, they're there for them. I'm sure many of them will even make them even more exciting and better than the ones that we provide for them. Basically, what we do start with is this sequence of learning, okay? So this is the one for geography as an example. So what we're looking at is, I'll just move on here, we're looking at the locational knowledge, okay, which is one of the 4 disciplines within the geography national curriculum, and it's mainly the substantive knowledge that we wish the children to acquire. Now on here, I've had a go at saying, by the end of year 4, by the end of year 5, as far as locational knowledge is concerned, this is what I want the children to take away. We can add that to the place knowledge that we wish for them to take away. And then we will have, obviously, the human and physical elements for them to take away before we move on to the disciplinary side of the curriculum, where we pick up on more disciplinary elements. So the main part of the disciplinary is obviously geographical skills and fieldwork, okay? Now they are outlined on this page for you in some detail. This is a potential way of working through that, which outlines the early years aspect going on to year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This will be one where we are doing 3 units of geography per year. And this is just one example, okay? There could be so many more examples that you could build up. The science and history curriculum kind of follow, the geography and history curriculum follow the same process, okay? Because it's down to you, basically, to really develop some of this. So what we've got here is the disciplinary side first on history, looking at chronology and causation, through from year 1 to year 6, or early years to year 6 rather. The historical inquiry from early years to year 6, the significance and interpretation of history from early years through to year 6, okay? And then we're looking at the sequence of the curriculum in science, where on the science knowledge side, this is what I want my children to know at any cost. In other words, I could easily add 10 more bullet points in each of these, okay? So they are doing 5 main bits, if you like, of science work in year 1. These are the things I would hope at the end of each of those units that the children would actually know and be able to remember, okay? Now, as I said, I could have added more, but I'm trying to focus on the most important elements for them. This is it for year 2. You'll notice I'm using the headings biology, chemistry, and physics. Now, there's only one element of physics in Key Stage 1, and that's seasonal change. As we move into Key Stage 2, we have more appearing, okay? So what we've got here is the breakdown accordingly for everything. There's no chemistry, incidentally, in year 6. So that's kind of underpins everything that we're actually doing. And from there, we then look at the opportunities for disciplinary knowledge or working scientifically using the 5 inquiry areas, such as comparative and fair testing, observations over time, research using secondary sources, grouping and classifying, and finally pattern seeking. So what I've tried to do here is to ensure that every year group, there are kind of 2, if possible, in each of the inquiry areas, and there's an evenness across it altogether. So they will have done at least 2 comparative fair testing, 2 observational times, etc., in each one. Okay, go to Key Stage 2. If you notice in Key Stage 2, in year 5 and year 6, there's a lot of pattern seeking opportunities there. Now, obviously, you can rearrange those so that you can actually do your own inquiry in a different place, etc., etc. This is just a suggested format that we actually work to. And again, a breakdown of what it might look like going from early years through to year 6, okay? Now, the difference in science, of course, is the national curriculum dictates it to us. okay? So we have far more provided for us, whereas in history and geography, there are far more choices for you to do if you're not actually, or if you're trying to keep up with the national curriculum. Then let's have a look at exemplars, okay? So this is an example of a unit of learning. I've chosen the Stone Age one deliberately. So we've got here the requirements of the national curriculum. Why are we actually doing this one? What is the substantive knowledge in history I want the children to acquire? That's right up front. Then we move on to the composite and components that I mentioned earlier, okay? Then we move on to a knowledge organizer. So each of the units of learning includes a knowledge organizer. And then we move on to the way we're going to work through it using the link it, learn it, check it, show it, and know it process, okay? Now, across that, then, we've then got the, within the same subject for link it. So in other words, if I'm doing some work on plants in year 3, I know they've already met plants in year 2 and 1. So right at the very beginning, I'm bringing together that knowledge in some way. We'll link it with another subject if that's appropriate as well. I'll look at how there may be links to other subjects from what we're looking at, or as I said earlier, links to their personal experiences, okay? So these are just ideas that the staff could do. And then we actually have these sort of things for linking it as well. Things like, you know, so here, well, what do I already know about the Stone Age? What do I think I already know about the Stone Age? What questions do I have about the Stone Age, okay? The idea here is what are their initial thoughts and what life must have been like for Stone Age people. And this is before the new learning gets started for them. Then the first of the components, what has helped us build a picture of what happened during the Stone Age is obviously a disciplinary part of the learning. Each of the components starts with a notes for teachers, okay? So the notes for teachers will, in a nutshell, explain to them what we're expecting to do in this unit, link them to some internet links quite nicely, and hopefully give them a chance to really gain what we want. So here, for instance, in terms of, you know, what has helped us build a picture, not surprisingly, we're looking at Skara Brae, okay? And we're looking at, so what did we learn from Skara Brae? We're using photographs for the children. We're explaining to them what actually happened in Skara Brae, how this settlement became part of what we now accept as one of the most important finds in European history as far as Stone Age period is concerned. We look at them and talk to them about this, and then we end up basically giving them an opportunity to look at an internet link, okay, and photographs on their tables for them. So if you can imagine a group of children having these photographs, having watched the internet link, what we're then asking them to do is, having looked at the photographs, what can they definitely say happened during the Stone Age period, or what life was like during the Stone Age period? What can we say probably happened, okay? And what do we now dismiss as definitely not having happened, like dinosaurs being on Earth perhaps at the same time? So we try and get them to be historians. We can try and get them to look at those areas that I'm suggesting. We then do the same with Stonehenge, okay, but from a slightly different angle, in as much we try and get them to interpret why Stonehenge was important and what was it about, basically. But we follow the same process, okay, using an internet link and using photographs to help children gain that sort of knowledge. The second component then is much more familiar, perhaps, as the key differences between the Stones, the Bronze, and the Iron Age. We've got, again, the teacher's notes coming in. We've got the 3 units of learning, as you can see here, through the internet links, okay? We've got a timeline coming in here and getting children to respond to that. We've got them to really then, having watched those internet links, to be able to summarize some bullet point things about each of the 3 periods, and then basically making a kind of a what do they now know that they didn't know before, and making a link around those, having watched another internet link at that stage. I'm trying to give you a kind of an overview here of what each unit is like, and just running it through for you gently. These are things that teachers can use, can actually make use of. Here is creating 10 questions that they would ask their partner about the different periods of time. 10 questions I'm intending to ask my partner about the iron age, for instance, okay? And then begin to actually use, the idea of smelting or melting the iron ore, for instance, and how much easier it was to make weapons, and just getting them perhaps to make an example for themselves. I'm not suggesting you melt the iron instantly, but using plasticine instead, perhaps. Again, the significance of the discovery of iron ore and the invention of wheel, because the concept of change is what we want to get across here. And if you look at the national curriculum, that's what you're intending to do. So I'm saying really important, therefore, that we look at the invention of the wheel, we look at the discovery of iron ore as being two important aspects that happened during the period of time we're watching. Again, start with the teacher's notes, and we begin to actually build up some picture about the kind of the development of the wheels over time. Okay, so what was like life before the wheel? What was like life after the wheel was invented? The impact through history of that development as well. Okay, and then they have an opportunity of actually creating a kind of a timeline just for the invention of wheels. So how did wheels evolve from the first of the wheels that we know about to, say, Formula One tires, for instance, on their cars today? And again, we get them to look at the usefulness of a wheel in our days today, how it's moved from kind of being used to move rock around to the impact the wheel has on our life today. And then a similar picture of iron ore, basically, okay? How much more quickly and easily and more efficient the tools were, and indeed the weapons were, once the iron was brought in and iron became the major medium by which they were made and so forth, okay? Then the creation of iron hill forts, or iron age hill forts, sorry, is looked at. And we look particularly again at the importance of them and why they came into being. We look at remains that may be around as well today, okay? And then they create a diagram of what one might have looked like for themselves, so they understand that before finalizing, really looking at that term hunter-gatherer. And for this bit, we're using the book Stone Age Boy to help us understand a little bit more about the terminology of hunter-gatherer and why it was deemed to be more important, okay? An important part of their life. Now, that kind of is the learning. However, throughout this, we've built in some check-ins, as I've said, the second or the third component of that check. So we're building in checkpoints every so often to see how the children are getting on. So a typical checkpoint would be, so what do we know about Stonehenge? Just dump everything down for me on a kind of a dump it type of idea, okay? Things like, 5 facts about the Iron Age, 5 facts about Skara Brae, just a kind of a 5-minute, 10-minute at the maximum activity, which will help me as a teacher really understand that the children are really keeping up with my learning as I'm going through. The other one is the expanded and elaborate side of things, where we get children to really learn about what they've learned about Skara Brae. Okay, so here, for instance, we learned a great deal about the Stone Age period because of the discovery of Skara Brae. Or we have to be very careful by making too many assumptions about the Stone Age period, and that again alludes to the evidence base that we have available and so on. Another one is the pyramid system, where I'd expect most of my children, if not all my children, to be able to cope with the bottom 3 questions. Most of my children cope with the next 2, and then have a challenging question for those that are really ready to meet it. Okay, and then there's another one here on the wheel side. The show it then is basically that memory map that I mentioned, okay? And here are some retrieval activities that I would do with my children after I've actually finished the learning, okay? So this may be a term later on, so things like a noughts and crosses game, okay? Things like a true and false paper, things like 12 words, and that 6 of them are relevant in terms of Stone Age period and 6 are not. Things like, early Stone Age and Iron Age, the differences that they can meet there. And then the stolen knowledge and own recall knowledge there, where first of all, we give them 2 minutes to recall everything they remember about the Stone Age. And then they have 2-minute period going to look at everybody else's answer. And then further 2 minutes where they sit down on their own and actually then put on the stolen knowledge side something they've actually remembered because they've seen it on somebody else's page. And things like, again, questions with answers, okay? And then again, this is an example of what the assessment for that subject might look like, okay? Because we've actually put it together in this way. So first of all, the assessment on using a quiz, okay, right at the end, which gives a multi-choice answers, okay? And then we have the disciplinary knowledge side. So look at the images of Skara Brae on sheet 1 and set out 5 things you now know, about the way they lived, okay? And the second of the disciplinary knowledge ones, look at the list on sheet 2 and work out which 2 pieces of reliable evidence can we use to work out how we know about the Stone Age. So there's the answer page, okay? And then this is the picture, this is the one I was talking about, the pictures on Skara Brae, okay? So showing those to children during this quiz, the children have to work out what they know, and these are the sources of evidence. So which of those are 2 reliable sources of evidence we use to build a picture of what happened during the Stone Age. So kind of just running through that then gives you an idea basically of what we're actually talking about. So we're aiming basically to have an assessment for each of the units that we're doing. We are currently up to more than half for each of them. So there's quizzes available immediately afterwards, which may well be redone at another time. We also have early years links going through all of this as well. They're actually already in place. And that basically would really build a part of the Learning Challenge curriculum. So the main aim in all of this basically is to support your teaching of history, geography, and science in the first instance, but at the same time develop children as historians, geographers, and scientists. For all your staff to be consistent in the way they're working by really looking at this way forward. And secondly, and most importantly, basically, it doesn't stop at that stage. You have access to that website through the year, and the idea is that we are continually adding and adding and adding more materials onto it as we go along. So we've got more than enough to give you a curriculum to get started with. We've got more than enough to make sure the implementation of that curriculum is as strong as it can be, so that children's books should look brilliant at the end. And last of all, basically, we are then adding and adding to that to help you actually ensure that you are moving on with the period of time. Okay, I hope that's been a helpful session and has helped you to understand a little bit more about the way the new Learning Challenge curriculum has actually been set out. Thanks very much, everybody.